Okay, of the two, oh,
Wait. Hi there, guys. This is Marvin Rappaport, a former member of the board of directors of the Ethelbert B. Crawford Public Library. I'm joined by Lynn Skolnick, former president of the board, and both of us are members of our local history committee, in which we try to capture the stories of people who grew up here, who spent a large part of their time here, working, vacationing, what have you. Mostly people who grew up and knew the community as it was and as it has become over the generations. Earlier, we interviewed Henry and Gordon MacAdam of Rose Valley Road in Monticello, whose family goes back to probably the Civil War days in the mid-1800s in the Monticello area. And we did a roughly 1 hour recording of their reminiscences growing up in the area. And I refer you to that earlier discussion, which can be found on the Crawford Library YouTube page under local history. This is chapter 2 because their families have so many stories and they themselves have been to so many places and done so many things that we wanted to see if we could add to it. Today is what, the 28th of 29th of September, 2024. Earlier in 24, we did the first chapter. So having said that, what I'd like to do is to ask each of you gentlemen to give me a 2 or 3 sentence summary of who you are and how you got here for those people who may not have watched the earlier version. Please, Henry, you want to start?
Of the two brothers, I'm Henry. I live in central New Jersey, but I did grow up in the Monticello area. But I left early after high school. So my connections with Monticello, as you'll see later on, in terms of what I have to say, are those of a visitor and revisitor and revisitor, even though my family's been there continuously. Gordon?
Yeah, for me, I was the brother that stayed around and raised my family here on the family property, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And had a business here for 33 years. And my children now are grown. Matter of fact, 2 of them are actually retired. So it's been a good run for me staying around. A lot of friends and things that I was involved in.
Okay. I would ask if you do mention family members or others to mention their names for those people who may not know who they are. And if you
and for those of us who do know who they are.
Very good. Thank you. So why don't we begin with, like a 30,000-foot view of how the area has changed over the years. Now, that's a big swallow, as they say. I don't expect you to be able to enunciate all the ways, but as it affects you and your family living where you did, how did things change over the years? And what do you remember with special fondness over those decades, as it were?
Gordon, you want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. The biggest changes I could see. I left Monticello in 1960, and except for sporadic visits, I was away overseas outside the U.S. a lot of that time. And the biggest single thing I noticed.
Tell us, when you say you were overseas, give us another sentence that goes with that. Where were you and roughly how long?
A number of places, but I lived in Britain and in Lebanon longest. Those at 2 different periods of my life.
And given that Lebanon's in the news, what did you do there?
I went there first to study history and archaeology at the American University in the Lebanese capital, Beirut.
Beirut, yeah.
And then I stayed on to teach, and then I stayed on to do graduate work and hopefully was going to retire. But by the mid-1980s, the Civil War there became so deadly that it was prudent of me to finally depart. My family had preceded me for about a year. But that really has nothing to do with Monticello, except the changes that I could note when I came back.
Okay.
And even in the 70s, when I was back on two or three visits, the biggest thing I could notice was the beginning of the closing of the hotels and the bungalow colonies. That was not a shock, because I was aware that the world was changing and people were finding other places to go just as cheaply as driving up to Monticello from the greater New York area. But the closing of those uh, uh, really touchstone places that had been in existence for almost a century by then, by the 1970s or 80s, that was the biggest change. What about you, Gordon, being there?
Yeah, for me, and I've mentioned this to a lot of people recently, is because I stayed here over the long haul, the difference on Broadway from when we were kids, and that Broadway was open at 9 o'clock at night, and there were people out shopping on the streets. All of the merchants had clothing, shoes, whatever it was, out on the sidewalk, and people were milling around. A lot of them too, and slowly that disappeared. And then you started seeing vacant buildings popping up. The movie theater that we went to all the time, and a number of the other places. So gradually, for me, it's gone from when I used to walk down the street, I knew so many people. And, fast forward to now, if I walk down the street, I hardly know anyone. And that's a natural progression, obviously, but all of the people that worked in the village or the town, for the utility companies, whatever it was, I knew all those people from high school for the most part. And it was always fun walking around because I ran into people that I hadn't seen maybe in a while, and we had a nice conversation. And now the majority of the people are gone, and Broadway is a marked difference of what we have.
Notwithstanding the fact that they redid Broadway and changed the parking arrangements, and frankly have spruced it up a bit in recent years as a result of that.
That median strip was a big surprise to me the first time I saw it.
Yeah, and as children, I'm sure you probably remember the angle parking that when we were very
Yes,
young.
absolutely.
Indeed.
What about the families that are in your area that you remember, growing up or since? Anybody, any group, any individuals or families stand out in your mind?
Well, by the time Gordon and I were old enough to know our family background, most of them were gone. It would have been my mother and her cousin Eleanor O'Donnell, the school teacher at Monticello, who really were our main connection to any of the earlier family. We came along much later. But as we dug into the family history that we put together in the 2010s, a lot of it did come back. For instance, when we were young in grade school and middle school, the old even up through the end of high school, the old family hotel owned by the Toohey family on what used to be Oakley Avenue, that building still stood. So that was a direct link to a business that one of our four families had made in Monticello. So there was some sense of connection there. But I don't know, Gordon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you want to address a little bit the Barth family and the Pancherson family as we grew up, who were so instrumental in our lives that made a huge difference. Go ahead and talk about that.
Okay. The Barth family Gordon mentioned was in some ways our closest neighbor on Rose Valley Road. They were second generation Americans, German immigrants who had settled in northern New Jersey. And somehow during the Depression, the early days of the Depression, 1931, Pauline Barth and her husband Al came up to the area, probably through connections with other German families who were already there, and bought what was a family property that had belonged to the King side of our family. And they converted that into a boarding house. They added a whole other half to the old farmhouse that stood there and then modernized it. And by the end of the 1930s, they were attracting people to come in the summer, families, to come with their children in the summer and get the feeling of being out in the country. And they even attracted some celebrities from time to time. I found out from Walter Barth, the son, one of the two sons of the Barth family, that Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey used to come and spend not summers, but they came up for hunting season. And they just like being in the country in the winter. So that was always a surprise. Gordon can talk about the Panchersons because they grew up. The Panchersons themselves were part of the Southwoods.
Yeah, one more thing on the Barth family. They were so instrumental, as we mentioned in the beginning segment that we did. And they were a half-mile away from us. That was our nearest neighbor back in the day. But one of my first jobs ever was mowing the lawn up there and changing out the screens and the storm windows on the boarding house at the beginning of the season and the end of the season. And just a wonderful family, and took us in several times, as we said, when we did not have running water at the house during the winter when it froze up. And the other family, which was 2 miles away, basically, was the Pancherson family, and which was John and Bertha Pancherson and their two sons, George and Henry. George was in Henry's graduating class.
A classmate.
And yeah, and Henry was a year behind me in high school. So we ended up going to the Pancherson. They had a little farm in the beginning. And John Pancherson was just all about doing things that would keep kids busy. And he just amazing the number of things that he did that we were involved in, from making maple syrup. He had a small sawmill. We learned, and they had the little farm there with a cow and some chickens and so forth. And that was just everyday stuff to us. And it was absolutely wonderful. He went on, he built a platform outside by his house. We had dances on the weekends at the Pancherson house, all of us local kids. And for me, which Henry didn't get involved with, was out of that relationship with the Pancherson family and the things that John helped all of us kids do, was we started a small gun club. And it was a core group of guys that were my age, basically, plus or minus a year or two. We all went to school together, and we were friends, and we were 13, 14 years old. And we started this gun club. And later, that transitioned, the number of us transitioned into a hunting camp of our own that I belonged to for 50 years. So that was a core group of guys, but it came out of that relationship with the Pancherson family.
And in that time, you guys went to, Henry mentioned elementary school and middle school and high school. That was all in the same building in those days.
Exactly.
You guys
you went from one end to the other.
Right,
From
exactly.
Bedford Avenue toward Broadway.
Right, and you took a bus basically to school, yes, and it went around and about through the countryside before you got there.
Yeah, the busing situation gradually unfolded after the after World War II and the consolidation of the school district. Up before then, there were the little one room. Everybody gets together to be taught. to which you would walk or ride your horse or something like that. But when the school district centralized, that's the word.
Yeah.
In the early 1950s, they started running a bus only on the main roads. We had to walk a mile and a half to get out to Southwoods Drive. There was a school bus stop there. And then in the mid 1950s, they began to run a small
Station wagon.
yeah, station wagon. Ralph Gordon, you remember his name.
Ralph Myers.
Ralph Myers drove that. That was only for a year or two. And then the buses finally came down Rose Valley Road after it had been widened and paved. So yes, getting back and forth to school eventually became an easy thing. Before that, you got lots of exercise in the morning and lots in the evening. That mile and a half walk, especially in the winter, was not an easy one.
Guys, you mentioned four families, and that has a resonance and a meaning to you. What should we know about the quote unquote four families?
Well, the first thing you need to know are their names. As Gordon and I got into the background of the family history, we discovered that there were four main branches, all Irish, who had come to Sullivan County, almost all of them in the 1850s, and as a result of the potato famine in Ireland. And the Tuohys became perhaps the most prominent, the Dohertys, and then the Kings and the Haddocks. And they covered, in terms of our finding out where they first settled, most of them started out as farmers, and several of them evolved into business people in Monticello. But they settled in almost every area of Sullivan County except the Northwest. I don't know what the area north of Liberty, up toward Livingston Manor. I don't think there were any of our relatives living there.
No.
But the Tuohy family settled in Coshocton Center. The King family settled in Jeffersonville. The Haddock family settled in the Neversink Valley originally. And who have I left out here, Gordon?
Say that again, Mac.
The Tuohys, the Dohertys, and the Haddocks. Oh, and the Kings. The
And
Kings.
Kings, yep.
Yeah, the Kings settled in Jeffersonville. Some of them moved to the Southwoods. Martin Tuohy, our great-great-grandfather, did, and Winifred King, our great-great-grandmother. But that was our first surprise. How many areas of Sullivan County? This includes Woodburn, Woodridge. Where else, Gordon?
Yeah, Hurleyville.
Yep.
Yep.
Forestburg, one of the older members of the family who had been a Civil War veteran, spent his last decade or 15 years or so living in Forestburg.
Yes.
You mentioned Civil War, and I'm going to get back to that in a second. I know you guys did a family history. Yes, you wrote a book about your families.
A 4-volume work.
Yeah. Okay. And I suspect that you did a family tree.
We did.
Which might have been pages long, given what you've told us in terms of the forefathers or foremothers of your families, and I'm guessing tons of cousins in all different places.
What we did was break the family tree into 4 units. Each of which got at least a page. Yes, so it's fairly extensive. And thanks to the internet, we were able to get a huge amount of background area, which 20 or 25 years ago wouldn't have been available. That was our biggest single resource.
So let's go back. You mentioned the Civil War. Did family members get involved in the Civil War that you were aware of?
Yeah, except for the Kings and the Haddocks, both the Tuohys and the Dohertys did. There were at least a couple of members of each of those families that signed up. I don't think they waited to be drafted. I think they signed up during the Civil War. And certainly James G. Doherty.
James Gordon, right.
James Gordon Doherty.
Yeah.
Did. And he ended up fighting for the Union forces at the Battle of Chancellorsville. And we got a few details on him. He had his horse shot out from under him, And at that point, he was able to, he stayed in the service till the end of the war. The battle that he fought in was in 1864. He stayed in service, but I don't know how many frontline combat experiences he had after that. And he had a bit of a limp because of the horse falling on him.
Yeah, he was mustered in Kiamisha Lake. That was the gathering point for the troops going from Sullivan County at Kiamisha Lake, and then they marched from there to Middletown to get the train. And yeah, we were able to uncover a lot of stuff about James Gordon. He's buried here in our family, one of our family plots, and very interesting life.
He was the family tailor.
Yes, he had the tailor shop on Broadway in Monticello.
And he lived right across the street from the Tuohys on what was Oakley Avenue.
Right.
His house is still there.
Yes.
I don't know who lives in it now. But he was a very, very well-respected tailor in Monticello.
Wow, terrific. You mentioned the Civil War. I know that one of you did a book about Stephen Crane, famous writer who spent time up here in Forestburg and who wrote The Red Badge of Courage, and is known actually throughout the world. I think he spent some time in Europe as well. You want to tell us a little bit about why you did that and what you learned and where we can get a copy of that book?
Yeah, well, for both of us, for Gordon and myself, Crane was really part of our background growing up, because we often went through Hartwood in Forestburg
on our bikes.
On our bikes, and there's a New York State historical sign on Crane Pond, in case you didn't know anything about it. The pond named after mainly Stephen Crane, although he lived there with his brother. And so someone famous like that, who spent a good part of his youth and young manhood, keep in mind, he only lived to the age of 28. So he packed a lot into the years when he was well known. He loved Hartwood. He loved Forestburg. His brother William was a well-respected lawyer in Port Jervis, and William helped to eventually buy the property that became the what is it, Gordon? The
Strawberry Hill?
No, yeah, that's
the Hartwood Association.
Oh,
yeah. He bought the 10,000 acres that got them started. Well, he didn't buy it himself. He oversaw it as a lawyer to draw up the documents. This is in the late 1880s. And that's how Stephen Crane became associated with Hartwood, because his brother William was instrumental in getting the property, and his other brother Edmund became caretaker of all 10,000 acres. So when Stephen was in the area, he often stayed with William and his wife and kids. The house was right on the pond. It no longer exists. So for me growing up, it was like Stephen Crane was a shirt-tail cousin. He had lived just down the road. If he hadn't died at the age of 28, if he had lived another 50 years until he died in 1900, if he had lived until 1950, he would have been 78, still hopefully getting around. And Gordon and I probably could have run into him if he was an old timer still living in Hartwood. He planned on Hartwood being his place of retirement if he ever did. He always talked about coming back there. But he went off to do journalism in New York, wrote novels, finally got the Hearst organization to finance him for war trips. First, the Greek-Turkish War in I forget the years. 1896, 97. And then he covered the Cuban crisis in 1898, and oversaw in some ways through his journalism the U.S. take control of Cuba and Puerto Rico at the end of that war. So,
And he
I-
write about some of those as well?
oh yeah, yeah. His just about everything he wrote survives. It's collected into a 4 or 5 volume set by the Crane Society, and it's just fascinating. So what I decided to do in later life was bring Crane back into my life through what he wrote and others wrote about him or said about him. So I set out, it was in 2022, no, 2021 actually. I bought the newest biography of Crane, an immense book, 800 pages, and I had what's called Crane Log, and that's a brief collection of everything about him that you can imagine. And I said, why don't I try to get this into dramatic form so that it might be put on a stage? So I came up with a 3-part, not sort of 3-act, three-part stage dramatization. Not a play in the sense where you have characters who have memorized dialogue on stage, but a series of readings by actors. And because we know quite a bit about Crane as a youth, you could even have a young person playing young Stephen Crane. Just speak things that others wrote about him or that he wrote about himself to an audience, very informally. You wouldn't have to dress up in period costume unless you wanted to, but it would bring the audience, I think, a lot closer than just saying, well, Crane wrote this book, the Red Badge of Courage, that's become a classic about, you know, combat and the fear it can instill. But, or the movie that was made later on. The dramatization I did tries to cover everything right down to the day he died in little bits and pieces. So I think it's more digestible.
And has it been performed or?
No,
Read.
it's going to be.
Oh,
The people who run the Crane House, a house his Crane's mother bought when his father died in Asbury Park, New Jersey. They have a little stage area, and they were very much taken with this idea. And probably not this year. Crane's birthday is the 1st of November. And next year will be the 125th year since his death. And I think they're planning to do something on that anniversary.
great. And your book is available locally?
It's available at Chris Company. They have they have the whole book on a PDF file. And if you want to, you can just ask them to print out a copy. It'll be $25, and they'll be very happy to do it. There's a copy in Crawford Library. There's a copy at the Sullivan County Historical Society. I don't know, Gordon distributed some to friends in Monticello, so yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I permit me one footnote. I live on the property that was built by Willis Butler for his daughter Elsie, who married Mr. Winterberger. And Mr. Butler was, for a time, the caretaker at Heartwood. And he had 35 acres deeded off at the very edge of the property, 20 acres of which I purchased with the house that he built for Elsie as a wedding present in 1938. So Heartwood, for those of us who live in Forestburg, is part of our world view. And in my case in particular, the idea that it was done by the caretaker of the Heartwood, I guess they call it Heartwood Estate or Heartwood Syndicate. And so it certainly resonates. That's wonderful. I highly recommend that people look for that book.
One thing that puzzled me about Crane, and then I'll stop talking about it.
Sure.
I can't make any connection, try as I might have, with Crane and Monticello. The train was only 8 miles on the train, straight through.
Yeah.
And I cannot find him ever going to Monticello, even to get tobacco. He would send a note to his brother William in Port Jervis on the train, please send me tobacco, smoking tobacco back. And it would come up on the train and of course get off. He was waiting at Heartwood Station.
Yeah, Heartwood Station was also owned by the Butlers, and they built that house, which mimics ours with the 3 arches and the train literally stopped there, as well as I think a post office at one point in time. And I know of other family members, the Galligans, for example, who live nearby, who also would call up neighbors or family in Port Jervis and say, please put something on the train for us. And the train would, slowly blow that smoke and come up the hill from Port Jervis.
That was our last real link with Crane. The O&W Railroad went out of business in 1958, but we were used to, as growing up in South Woods, to hearing the train in the distance, the whistle and whatnot, or going down to the tracks to watch it. And
fascinating. Gordon, we'll give you a chance to chat a little bit. Tell us about the Neversink Gorge. You mentioned Forestburg, and the Neversink, of course, runs through it. And the gorge and the project that was planned for the gorge emanated or ended up this way. Gordon, what should we know about the Hackle Dam and the Neversink Gorge?
Well, right now, we know quite a bit. And basically from the area from Bridgeville down to Oakland Valley, okay, that eight miles or so of River Valley. And when Mac and I started on an initial project there about the hydroelectric plant that was proposed in 1913, and John Conway had, our county historian, had done a newspaper article on it. I had never heard of it. And then when we looked into it and discovered that it was a massive project that was in the newspaper from basically 1913 to 1939, and they were going to build a 100-foot high dam on the Neversink River, and back the water up from, that's in the town of Forestburg, okay, at what is Denton Falls, and they were going to back the water up from there all the way from Forestburg all the way across the town of Thompson into the town of Fallsburg, up about 3 miles from Bridgeville upriver into Fallsburg at Denniston Ford, where there was a bridge across the river at the time. It was going to be a 9-mile reservoir. They were going to dig this again was to generate electric. They were going to dig a tunnel from the dam site through the Shawangunk Mountains over to 5.5-mile tunnel over to Route 209, okay, a little village over there. And that's where the hydroelectric plant was going to be, and to generate electric to New York and New Jersey. This was a big project. This was not a just local electric that they were looking to do. They were going to put in a 2.5-mile train line, which would have come across our great-grandfather's property on Rose Valley Road, because the train existed on his property going into Monticello from Port Jervis, and they were going to tap into the train line there and run a spur line down to the dam site so that they could get material in and out of that in building it. So that was our first project, and we put that all together. And there's a diorama of that whole project up on the wall over at the Sullivan County Historical Society in Hurleyville, next to our one-room school project. But then after that, we started to look at a little broader history.
Wait, don't leave us in suspense. What happened to it? Why did it not come to
Oh, sorry about that. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
World War I happened to it.
Yeah, the short story was that World War I came along, and the backers of that project decided, I guess, that they could make more money shipping gunpowder and ammunition and stuff for the war than they could investing in a hydroelectric plant. It was brought up to be revived a couple of different times, but it never happened. So that was the end of the project. But what we continued on doing was looking at the small little villages that existed Bridgeville itself was the first one where people started coming into Sullivan County from Orange County. And Bridgeville was a thriving little village at one point with a post office, a school, churches.
Covered bridge?
What's that?
Covered bridge?
First bridge, I
Yes.
think.
Or, yeah.
1809, yes, that bridge was built because of the group of people of investors who had put together money to build the Newburgh-Checkton Turnpike, which was the first major thoroughfare, and they needed that bridge to get across that river. But the idea was that wagon road would go from the Hudson River, where they were bringing material up from New York, and it would go to the Delaware River. And at any rate, we were looking into the various little villages, starting from Bridgeville, and just about a mile downriver on the Monticello side. Okay, not the Ski Hill side, but on the Monticello side, there was a little hamlet there called Tannersdale. Okay, and obviously the name came from the fact that they were doing a lot of tanning back in the day. Sullivan County produced more leather for the Civil War than anywhere else. And then downriver from that, at the 4-mile mark, was basically Hackledam, the village which existed on both sides of the river. And that was where one of our schools was located in the school project. And there was a famous swinging bridge across the river that was built there in the early 1800s, so that the people on both sides of the village could go back and forth.
You use the word swinging, but literally, it wasn't anchored as they are today, but
was it
suspended as it were cable.
Yes, yes, and
Wow.
we have pictures of that on the display in Hurleyville as part of that project. And then that village existed from the early 1800s to about 1916, and then the logging and so forth, that was the backbone of that community, was done. They had logged what could be logged, and now the village was dwindling down. Further downriver on the Monticello side was, and you're familiar with this, where the train station was in Forestburg. And that was, what's the name, Mac, I'm looking for?
The name for what?
At the train station in
Hartwood.
No. Gilman Station.
Gilman's.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Gilman's was quite a large village with a school, post office. We have some old pictures of that, and the old train station is still there. So that was another village that existed, that they were getting logs out of the Neversink River Valley for the mill that Gilman had there, besides the fact that he was cutting down the hemlock trees for the bark, which went to the tanning industry. Then a little further down the river on the other side, you had Quarryville. Before you get to Oakland Valley, that was on the east side of the river, and the Case family had a lot to do with Quarryville, and they were mining bluestone off of those ledges and pulling it out of there with horses and wagons down to Oakland to get it on the train and send it to New York for sidewalks and so forth. So that's another little community that disappeared. And then the last one was Oakland itself, which back in the day was, again, a bustling little town, and the railroad came through there. So it was just those 5 places that we've undug the history on, and we're thankful that we have a woman who's been working with us for the last 5 years, Nancy Bohanna, who has done so much of the detailed digging into the old records. And our stuff is online now on a website, which is thecleo.com. And you can access that, what we've put together so far.
CLEO?
The Clio, yeah,
T-H-E-L-E-O.
THECLIO.
.com.
I-O or E-O?
What does it stand for?
Why did
Never.
you ask me that? I did know.
Sorry.
I think they took the name from one of the old Greek muses of history
Oh,
and
Cleo.
literature, right?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't
That's
remember.
that's my guess.
Okay, very
But at
good.
any rate, if you Google that now, you will see our work on there of what we have put together. And again, thanks so much to Nancy for the work she's done with us. Now, where we're going with that is that history at some point, we are hoping will be on the New York State DEC website, so that people going into the Neversink River Gorge to hike will be able to access that information. And also it will be on the website for the New York, New Jersey Trail Association hikers. So we hope eventually that a lot of people will get to know that river valley more extensively through the research that we've done. It's been a lot of fun. We're hoping to wind that up by the end of the year, but I don't know whether we're going to be able to or not.
You mentioned in passing, a one-room schoolhouse at one of these little villages. I can't resist, and I don't know we need to get into it at great lengths, but you guys also have done a study of the one-room schoolhouses in the town of Thompson, yes?
Yes.
And did a
Correct.
book, about an inch thick book of history of each of those one-room schoolhouses, because
Yeah, there were
prior to the central school being put together, as you mentioned, Henry, there were a series of one-room schoolhouses within a mile or two of most of the residents in these respective areas. I know my dad, Leo Rappaport, grew up on Hamilton Road, what is called Hamilton Road now, and walked to a one-room schoolhouse near where the Esther Manor is, out on 17B.
That school is still there.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's a different building. Some of these buildings have been converted, obviously, to different uses, and so you've also helped develop the history of all of these one-room schoolhouses.
Well, there were 20 of them. So even if you had only one page per school, you'd have at least 20 pages. And we found out lots more. We just missed going to the one-room school that was closest to us. It closed in 1943. I started kindergarten in 1947, so it was only 4 years. And Gordon started just a few years later.
But there were still some one-room schoolhouses in the 50s.
Rock
I know
Hill.
Alan Barish, for example, went to a one-room schoolhouse in Kymisha,
And there was
well
one in
into
Rock Hill.
elementary school years before everything merged and it all came into the
That's
village
right.
of Monticello.
The one-room school in Rock Hill, I think, closed in 1960. So
That's correct, Mac. Yeah, Kymisha closed in 58.
yeah.
Yes,
And you were able
Alan
to
was the
erect
health
markers, historical markers at each of those sites as well.
Yes.
Yes. And we're working on some projects now. Marvin was kind enough to, and Denise to come to the unveiling of the Jewish War Veterans Building. We just did the plaque on that 2 months ago. And then a few weeks ago, we did the one in Hurleyville.
Oh, yes.
For
the bagel machine.
Label Wyszynski.
Wyszynski, yeah, and the family came back and we had a nice presentation there. We're working on an additional one now with the county planning department for the museum school building itself in Hurleyville. So we hope to have that up next year, and we're also trying to finish up our work on the Sullivan County Poorhouse. And we hope to put up 2 historic plaques for that.
Was that on Thompsonville Road?
One was on Thompsonville Road. That was the second location from 1860 to 1950. And prior to that, directly across Route 17 from Robert Greene Chevrolet, where the ARC building is, And back in the day, it was Pepe's Motel.
Sure.
Okay, that 100 acres there, matter of fact, which Eddie Cook used to own for a number of years. That was the first location of the poorhouse from 1830 to 1860. And then when it burned down, they moved to Thompsonville.
My dad, as a kid, we took a ride once and he said to me, that's where the poorhouse was, right over there. And I said, there's no remnants of it. And it was interesting that he knew about it and remembered it. Of course, he grew up here. He was born in 17 and lived throughout the 20s, 30s, literally all through the century.
What exactly was the purpose of the poorhouse? What people, they took in people who had no other place to go?
Yes.
Basically were destitute, or
like
came
a shelter.
They had some families. A lot of them had no families. The legislation was passed in New York State, if you can imagine, in 1828, that each county was mandated. Okay, we've looked at this legislation to provide a poorhouse for their county. Now, if you can think back of what Sullivan County must have been in 1828, there were hardly any people here. So you didn't just go out and raise the taxes to provide a poorhouse. Well, it took from 1826, I think that legislation was, it took till 1830 before Sullivan County was able to open a poorhouse. And there's a whole lot of other story involved that with this research that we've done. But as an example, Mike Taylor, when he bought the Ski Hill property, did not know that next to the Bridgeville Cemetery that most people know going in and out of the Ski Hill, the Bridgeville Cemetery itself is very visible. But to the left of that, on a little knoll, that was one of the poorhouse burial grounds. And there are over 100 people buried there. No markers other than a vertical field stone. And I actually got as part of our project, we got the Rock Hill Boy Scouts to come in and clean that up. And the town will now take it over as far as keeping it clear. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes with the poorhouse story, but that's not our focus here.
No, but speaking of taking in families, can I just give a brief shout out to two Monticello families who sort of took me in when I was in high school?
Sure.
The Holtzman family of 2 Green Street. I think anybody who was in Monticello at the time knew Julie Holtzman, who worked up at the Monticello Hospital until he retired, I think. Julie and Bibi and their daughter Naomi and their son David. Naomi and I were steady dates my senior year of high school. So that's when I got to know the Holtzman family. And the other family were the Kalkas. Jack and his wife Stella. Jack was involved in unions. I think the electrical union of Monticello or the plumbers union, something like that. And his wife was a dental assistant. But Steve Kalka, their son, and I were best buddies in high school. And their daughter Beth, who was Beth Kalka was like David Holtzman. He was almost 8 years younger than I was. They were. So I never got to know them well. But Steve still lives in Hurleyville, as far as I know.
No, I think he passed away.
Steve Kalka?
The Steve Kalka I knew,
Yes.
passed away.
Well, that must have been recently.
Yes, fairly recently.
I didn't know. Gordon usually catches obits when they come out in the papers and sends them to me, and I did not know that.
I did not see Steve's obit.
I'll have to look it up.
I used to see him at Forestburg Theater during the summer times. He and his wife came when Carol and I were there.
His wife passed away a few years ago.
Yes, that I knew about.
Sherry, but he passed away not too long ago.
I see.
Okay.
I saw something online, perhaps on Facebook, from his Sherry's daughter, perhaps. Yeah.
But his parents were great people, just like Naomi's parents were just wonderful people, and it made me feel right at home. So those are very fond memories. So-
Let's look forward instead of backwards, although you guys are doing a great job of running this history for us. You're in the process of putting your property on Rose Valley Road into a protective stewardship of the Delaware Valley Conservancy, I'm told. Can you tell us what that's about and why would you do that and what the benefits are going forward for generations to come?
Gordon's the best one to talk about it because he's on the ground. I live in central New Jersey and don't get up there that often, but of course I'm involved in it. But this goes back to what, 2010, Gordon, when the first part of the property?
Yeah, well, we in 2012, we actually were able to take my mom's house and 26 acres of the 65 that our family has owned since 1874. This is the 150th anniversary. And yeah, we started in 2010 looking at this, and then in 2012 we were able to put the house and the 26 acres into the conservancy so that the property would stay forever wild. That's the key. And we reserved 2 acres around the house. That's the only place that could be built. Now, fast forward, a number of things happening in the family since 2012. One being the fact that my 4 children, when my wife, my first wife and I were divorced, the property that I had of the family, like Henry had 20 acres, I had 20 acres, and my wife and I deeded that to my 4 children in 1997 as part of our divorce agreement. At that point, we did not have any idea who might be staying around, okay, in the future to possibly use that property. And fast forward to 2 years ago, and we're looking at the situation and realizing that bottom line is there is nobody coming back. Okay, so I said to my 4 children, not for nothing, you guys are not coming back. And none of you really have any use for the property. The value of the property is not a big deal. If it was sold and you divided it 4 ways, you guys are doing quite well, and that's not going to make any difference in your life. And I thank them profusely for paying the taxes for 27 years or whatever that they did. And I said, you know, you guys have never paid me back any of the tuition money. So how about you deed the property back to Dad, and you got it for $1. And back in 1997, how about you deed it back to Dad, and then we'll work on conserving it with the Conservancy. So again, I reminded them lightly that they really didn't need the money, any of them. So they did. And last October, I took possession of the property, and then contacted Mac, and we immediately began work with the Conservancy. The process usually takes a year. It can take longer. There are a lot of steps to it. It's not difficult. It's just lengthy. And you have to have everybody from environmental assessment agencies come in there to make sure that there's nothing going on the property or around the property that would be detrimental to it. It has to be resurveyed. It has to have 2 appraisals done. So right now, up until just a couple of weeks ago, we were not getting the green light from the Conservancy that we could finish this year. But 2 weeks ago we did. That doesn't mean that we're going to be able to finish by December 31st, but they're on board with trying to do that. They're working on a number of other properties besides ours. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to get this done by December 31st. What that means then is simply, and we're setting aside 2 acres buildable on the 18.5 acres. so that the property can be used and enjoyed by people down the road. But the rest of it can never be developed. And we preserved the road frontage on the west side of the property between two family houses, and now we're preserving the frontage on the property on the east side. Any of the building that can be done on the 2 acres will be up on top of the plateau and hardly visible from the road at all. And that's what we're looking for. So thank goodness that we live in a state where both New York State and our federal government have tax laws that make it possible for little folks like my brother and I to be able to do this type of thing and recap the money that we have to lay out to get this done, which is considerable. But through the tax deductions that will come down the road in the next 5 or 6 years, after we close, we can recap most of that money. And in addition, when you do this, New York State gives you a 25% reduction in your property taxes that you have to file each year, okay? In addition, the assessment on the property will be lowered because once you have an environmental easement with the Conservancy, the environmental easement is very similar to what you would have for a utility easement when they run power lines across your property. The good news is you still own it, you still pay taxes on it, but you can't use it, and you have restrictions that you can't build within so many feet of a power line and that type of thing. And this conservation easement works in a similar way. So because you've reduced the value of the property, you can apply to the town of Thompson, which we did before in 2012, to reduce the taxes. So you get reduced taxes, and then you get a 25% tax break each year. And that 25% tax break runs with the property, regardless of who owns it in the future.
Wow, thank you for that. Actually, a history lesson in how to preserve property, it seems to me, but also it underscores your commitment to this community and keeping, some of the more pristine places in the shape that it's in now, at least, and making sure future generations can enjoy it.
Let me just
show.
I want to hold up
another shout out.
This is the shirts. I don't know if you can see them or not.
Let's
see.
See.
See that?
Oh, Rose Valley.
Oh, very nice.
And
that's great.
I've got one here also.
And I assume all the kids are going to get them.
So Mac's birthday was back in August. So back in June or July, when I came up with that idea, I had the shirts made up, and I wanted to make sure that I got one to him for his birthday. And we sent them out to a number of other family members who have connections, to the property. So we're very pleased to. Mac and I are just pleased that we're able to stick around long enough to get this stuff done, to write the history of our family and to now preserve the property itself. It doesn't get much better than that from our perspective.
Yeah, the property has been in the family for 150 years this year.
Wow.
November will be when the actual purchase of it took place. So
wow. Well, it's a good way to summarize where we are as we wind down. Guys, your history, I don't know if I can use the word unique, but it is certainly very different from a lot of families who live here, and many of whom came into the 1900s. And while their storied history, none of them go back 150 years that I'm aware of, except maybe neighbors that you knew lived near you at that time. As we close down, any closing thoughts on the wonderful now 2 hours that we've spent together, learning about your family's history, learning about your take on the community, how the world has changed here in our area? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, mine is thank you very much for arranging this and for giving us a double shot most of your interviewees probably don't get that, and we're very, very grateful for it.
They don't go back 150 years either.
And I have to say, I have learned so much about this area from these two interviews. Thank you for that.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you, Lynn.
You're very
Thank
kind,
you.
Lynn.
Lynn's a relative newbie, only what, 40 years or 50?
Over 50 years, but I'm still considered Johnny come lately.
Gordon,
Yeah,
anything as we close?
From my perspective, I think just having stayed here and made all of the friends that I did from the very beginning, going to school and going through a series of organizations from the humble beginnings in the gun club and the hunting camp, but then I moved on to the Monticello JCs, and also with 10 years with Monticello Little League, which was some of the most fun years of my life with Bill Sipos and a number of the other people, and all the people that I met along the way that are still friends of mine that I see around from time to time. So it's just been a great run right here in downtown Monticello.
Thank you. You mentioned Bill Sipos. We just did an interview with Bill, and his history will be online as well. And
Great.
it's nice that you mentioned him. Guys, thank you for your time, for your energy, for your efforts, for the work that you've done to preserve the beautiful area that we all care about. We hope that future generations will listen to and learn from. And once you get on YouTube, the whole world can tune in, as you know.
Right.
As you know from last time, you get hundreds, if not thousands, of views depending upon the subject. So we'll have it up shortly. We'll send you copies to share with your family. And you should live and be well, as my grandma used to say. And again, thank you for everything you've done. Lynn, thank you for joining us. Henry, Mac, I hope you're well and you're
Thank you both, and please thank Alan. I assume he was unable to attend this morning.
Yes, Alan Barish has done a lot of work with our local history project as well. Terrific, guys. Good to see you.
Thank you both. Bye now.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.